As the globe races towards these target demands for these key metallic and non-metallic resources that underpin net zero emissions, and investments in clean energy and transport is projected to increase by over 500%. Africa holds a significant of these minerals, and increased demand presents environmental challenges. Increased demand presents economic challenges. Increased demand presents geopolitical partnership and trade implications for the entire African continent, which needs to be addressed to ensure optimal benefit can be drawn to benefit mothers, children, fathers, brothers across the entire African continent. But when it comes to environmental aspect, environmentally extracting critical minerals will take a toll on environmental resources and ramp up degradation. Economically speaking, Africa's primary focus as we speak today is on upstream mining, with minimal to non-existent processing and refinement, minimizing opportunity to maximize earnings and competitiveness. Geopolitically, while critical minerals are essential globally, their extraction is geographically concentrated and not uniformly distributed even across the entire African continent. In Africa, as we're speaking today, just about 5 to 10 countries have notable reserves and face significant competition from other producers outside of the continent. In addition, the pace of disruptive innovations and technologies, especially meat and end-stage production, is rapidly changing. On partnerships, progressive collaborations that underpin the needs to target will tap into limited numbers of partners that can be able not only to bring experience and expertise, but actually help the continent to start adding value, and leveraging on AfTAC, the Africa Continental Free Trade, could be an opportunity. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, putting all these together, the race towards net zero emissions implies a race to clean energy transition, which translates to increasing demand for critical minerals and an opportunity to accelerate Africa's transformational development with the environment being intact. But as we do so, and as we're going to hear from our eminent panelists, we must always remember that even the best cooking pot cannot produce food. It is now an honor for me to deep dive into this discussion. The panelists who are already seated, and I would like to start off with Caroline Abuti, to be able to just in 2 minutes, please, give perspective, taking into consideration that you come from the Ministry of Environment, of Energy and Minerals, and Uganda is among countries with deposits of critical minerals. And the government is on course, like many other governments across the continent, to set up national mining companies. That's what most governments are doing at the moment. But what I would like in your first 2 minutes is just to put in perspective, how do you think that in putting in place these aspects, environmental standards, and opportunity to mitigate negative impacts of local communities, biodiversity, and ecosystems can actually be handled? 2 minutes, please.
Thank you. Uganda as a country, like you have clearly indicated, has a vast deposit of minerals that we are promoting, and we are really focusing on sustainable extraction of the minerals. Uganda is a signatory to ETI, and we have produced our second report, and we are making sure that all that we do is sustainable. So we are really making sure that the aspects of biodiversity conservation are taken into consideration. We ensure that all the contractors have biodiversity management plans, but also critically in terms of consideration for gender. It is very critical that we have focused on the aspects of gender, but also in terms of alternatives to the use of mercury. The country is actually focusing on ensuring that we introduce alternatives to the use of mercury, and the aspects of waste management, more critically in relation to management of wastewater. So we are trying to ensure that we do plans for the mining sector such that each of the mines do an environment and social impact assessment and come up with a mine plan. and each of the areas where they actually do the mining is managed in a very sustainable manner. So the country actually has very critical minerals, which can be used for the manufacture of electric cars, wind turbines, solar and batteries. But certainly the aspects of the sustainable extraction are very important for us right now. And we are focusing on ensuring that we eliminate the use of child labor in the extractive industry. And we are working with the various stakeholders to actually ensure that everybody is brought on board and we monitor the activities of the different companies. But also we are focusing on the aspects of the local content. So we have a local content policy that actually guides the implementation of the activities. And we have also introduced the aspects of the environment bonds. So we expect that all the companies that actually go into the extraction uh, sign up the environment bonds, which we can then be able to use for the cleanup of the activities, just in case they breach.
Yes, Caroline, let me just jump in there. You mentioned the aspect of child labor, which I think all the panelists are definitely going to mention this. And from statistics that we are seeing, some countries actually have up to about 40,000 children who are as young as 6 years lured into this mining. You have indicated that that aspect is being taken into consideration. So how as a country, are you going to handle that very briefly as you run off your first opening remarks?
In terms of the child labor, we have an employment act as a country that we actually use. And then we also have an occupational health and safety act. And this clearly indicates that mining, given the nature of mining, you can only have people who are above 18 years. I know that there are provisions somewhere where they say people can be employed at 14 and 16 years, but specifically for us as a country, our focus is on 18 years because of the nature of the activities in the mining sector. So we work with the different stakeholders like the civil society to actually ensure that we enforce the aspects of not using child labor at the mining sites, but also we create awareness among the people who are actually doing the extractive uh, industry activities. And the fact that Uganda is a member of ETI, that is one of the parameters that we are used to, they used to. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. You've mentioned the aspect of civil societies and non-state actors. I'll go now to you, Shavi, as the lead in metals and mining and with the climate champion team. Caroline has mentioned the aspect of civil society, but what I would like to understand from you is that the new climate goals that are currently in place are going to need a lot of these critical minerals, nickel, cobalt, lithium. But what I would like to hear from you, especially, is because, yes, government set the enabling environment. Government put the policies in place that are the biggest driver of change. But without engaging state and non-state actors who cannot be able to make progress. So what I would like to hear from you, how do we ensure that we engage these state and non-state actors and at the same time build trust, ensure accountability, reliability, and of course, sustainability in such a way that
so our role in the Climate Champions team is to enhance ambition and strengthen our engagement with non-state actors. And who do I mean by non-state actors? Civil society, private sector, mining companies, stakeholders across the value chain, purchasing organizations, and others. And what we do is we work with these non-state actors and with the Marrakesh Partnership to deliver the goals of the Paris Agreement. And that encompasses looking at signals of change, whether it's policy, technology, demand, supply. And I think quite specifically in the case of metals and mining, it's interesting that we actually also have what we call the 2030 breakthroughs. Those are essentially representing tipping points for where are we really seeing, what is a demonstration of change that we're seeing in the sector. And for metals and mining, our breakthrough goals for 2030 are 60% reduction of operational emissions, increase in the production of critical minerals, and then finally, responsible mining practices. And these 2030 breakthroughs are derived from the climate action pathways that are indications of kind of roadmaps for us to achieve the Paris Agreement. And they were developed by the high-level climate champions, and our non-state actor partners as part of the Marrakesh Partnership.
Yes, this is quite very, very good. Yes, 30% of all the critical minerals that are needed are in this continent. But one aspect that I would like to get your perspective as I move to the next panelist is that critical minerals are becoming as if they are an eminent area, and at the same time, as we speak, the earnings from fossil fuels actually outweigh the competition that has been made for these critical minerals. And actually, the figures are that range from fossil fuels, oil and gas, estimated at 2 trillion in 2021, compared to critical minerals, copper, lithium, nickel. So what I would like to hear from you, what do you think needs to be done to enhance competitiveness of these critical minerals, leveraging the whole of society, including all those non-state actors? Very briefly, please, in 1 minute.
Sure, very briefly. I think what's really changing is stakeholder pressure. So you have stakeholder pressure from investors, from consumers, from customers, from regulation, and mining companies today, tier one mining CEO agendas already have sustainability on their agendas. This includes some examples that I mentioned around decarbonizing operations, adopting responsible mining standards. We are working with an organization called IRMA, Initiative for Responsible Mining Assurance, that does third-party audits to ensure that responsible mining is actually upheld at these sites.
Yes, this is excellent. But is this driven by policy, or this is something that is happening without a regulatory environment for it? For example, if they have decarbonization plans, have these been already put? Is there a policy in place that is incentivizing that? Because without policy, there will be no checks and balances to an extent, and there might be no disclosure that is realistic.
It's a fine balance, right? It's driven by the market, but it's also driven by policy, and in different countries it
I'll
varies.
come back to you
Yeah.
on that. I think that's quite very, very interesting. I think I'll get to this array. Africa is a young continent, without any debate about that. Over 70% of the continent is below the age of 30. And this array, you are a youth advocate from Zimbabwe, and Zimbabwe is notable for its lithium reserves in the continent today. Actually, the highest, I think, is the 6th in the entire world. And given the fact that youth, this is a young continent, that means that Africa as a continent is a youthful continent. And if it is a youthful continent, what is the place and space of youth in this debate?
Okay, thank you so much for the opportunity of giving young people to speak. Well, in relation to your question, I believe the space of the youth is very vast because there are many constraints that are considered when it comes to the issue of critical minerals and metals, and that is why, as young people, we keep emphasizing the fact of strategically investing in education and skills. Even that includes skills development and health infrastructure for young people. And it's actually a very crucial factor because in Africa, we are, as most of the countries are at the third stage of the demographic transition model. That means we are not yet that economically developed. So at the end of the day, transitioning to green energy will be needing a lot of factors to be put into consideration. And the first factor is make sure that we utilize the minerals that we have in our own countries for our own development. There was a doctor who was speaking today, and he was saying that minerals in Africa must be developed to use Africa, must be used to develop Africa, not like we take the critical minerals and use them to develop somewhere else. So we believe that with the transition to renewable energy, it can be able to create up to 42 million jobs by 2050. But the problem is that careers for young people, are limited, especially when it comes to green transition to renewable energy, because these companies that are investing in fossil fuels, they are coming in with a lot of attractive incentives, and it also includes education costs. So at the end of the day, they are not investing these fossil fuels in their countries; they're bringing it here in Africa. At the end of the day, we as young people were suffering, from the consequences of fossil fuel investment. That is why, in conclusion, with that, we're saying we must have representation in all seats like these ones, so that when these policies and when these deals are negotiated, we also have a say in them, because there's a lot of untapped energy amongst young people in the issue of renewable energy.
Policymaker is listening to you at the moment, representing the voices of the youth across the continent as you speak here today. What message will you give them? You've highlighted the aspect of skills retooling, which is very, very important. Do you think that this is prioritized in the space of ensuring that young people have their space and place in this debate at the moment? Briefly, 1 minute, please.
Yeah, sure. I don't. We are being included in these spaces, but we have not reached the level in which we can actually actively participate in, influencing policies that bring meaningful participation. Because as I have said, the attractive incentives that have been given to young people are lowering them into doing things that they're going to regret later. So that is why we're saying if we reach that stage where we prioritize meaningful, engagement and support for young people, especially those who are, disproportionate. But at the end of the day, not leading to child labor, which was being talked about. I think that would be a very good thing to consider.
I think that's a very good point that you've ended with. I'll get to you now, Fatima, as the policy manager of Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. You've heard from Caroline, you've heard from Xavi, you've heard from Desiree, and the point is we are not where we're supposed to be, but the debate is advancing faster than the action seems to be from what he's saying is that we are not where we are supposed to be. So your organization mission, as you speak today, centers on enhancing transparency. Transparency along the mineral supply chain. So my question to you is, there is lack of transparency. The child labor aspect, how do we track it? The management of these resources to ensure that at least they're equitably distributed to avoid conflict. What, in 2 minutes, do you think needs to be done or it's been done and needs to be scaled up?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much, Richard, for having me on this panel. My name is Fatma Nyambura. I'm a policy manager at the Extractives Industry Transparency Initiative, which is a global standard for oil, gas, and mining. As has been mentioned, there are several challenges affecting mining, and especially looking at the African continent. And I'm very honored to be on this panel with one of my implementing countries, being Uganda. So at the EITI, how we support countries is looking at thematic areas within the space. So for example, if I may pick beneficial ownership, as has been mentioned, mining has been happening for many years in Africa. However, these benefits are not trickling down to communities, to the state. We see a lot of IFFs, leakages in transfer pricing. And therefore, for a country, if they are able to pass beneficial ownership legislation, for example, and establish registers, they are able to determine who are the true owners of companies, therefore helping to curb corruption and ensure effective taxation. Additionally, other thematic areas such as contract transparency also assist in enhancing, I would say.
Let me just jump in there before you go to the contract aspect. You've talked about illicit financial flows. That is draining the continent, and Africa loses up to 89 billion through illicit financial flows and tax evasions. So how is your organization actually handling it? Because it's a huge issue in the continent, draining resources that could have been put into development and driving sustainability.
Thanks for that question. So when it comes to IFFs, the EITI requires disclosure of revenues paid to government by companies, what government is remitting to subnational governments, as well as what is remitted to communities, and also disclosure of production and export values. So how we work is with CSOs to interrogate this data. Is it matching up to what is being published by the companies? Because a lot of these majors are listed in the global north and therefore have to publish this information. And you have on the other side the government and the revenue authority. So what we at the EITI support is reconciliation of these figures in order to, I would say, see if there are any discrepancies, and if they are, what is causing them.
Wonderful, that is really excellent. Then on the contracting part, it's been argued that sometimes these contracts are signed without being read. How are you handling that?
So I'll be candid with you. Contract transparency is an area that we are having to really push, because companies on the one hand do state that they're commercially sensitive provisions, and you see that governments are also hesitant to push the companies because they feel this might make them uncompetitive. So some of the strategies we are employing in supporting contract transparency is having governments first release the critical parts. So starting with who are the key parties to the agreement? Because here you'll notice we have what we call state-owned enterprises who play a crucial role in this transaction, but most of the time are not privy to public scrutiny. We're also understanding where these revenues being paid to. One of the major leakages is that you'll notice revenues that are due to the state are not being paid directly into treasury, but end up being paid into accounts that are offshore or in people's names. Additionally, is also understanding what is the area, what is the license area? Because in a lot of jurisdictions, license portals are not open. One must go to a mining ministry, write letters. So these are some of the, I would say, key points we're starting to encourage governments to release.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Fatma, for that perspective, which is quite very, very important. And you've touched an aspect that is quite very, very fundamental. Leakages. I'll get to Garrett from the African Development Bank, the Bank of the Continent. It's investing in driving clean energy. And we know that Africa's clean energy transition is estimated at about 17 to 25 billion each and every year. But in the past 7 years or so, the African Development Bank, from the statistic we have invested over 44 billion in Africa's infrastructure in general. And the bank has also invested 20 billion in private equity fund, especially targeting renewable projects. You've heard from Fatma, she's talking about leakages, which means that these investments and the leakages could have added to this. But what I would like to hear from you, how do you think these resources could be effectively used to help building on what we've already heard, to cover the financing for critical minerals, especially to ensure that value is added and investments remain in the continent? Your perspective, please, in 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. Let me just start with a couple of comments on some things I've already heard. We also experience, for example, in financing renewable energy projects, that donors are scrutinizing the source of solar panels and enforced labor, particularly coming from China. And this is it speaks to this supply chain transparency and some of the points that Fatima mentioned. So this is really happening. We are seeing that investors are very aware of these issues, and it's encompassed within the environmental and social safeguards which need to address topics such as gender and youth and child labor. The other point I want to highlight is that I think it's not all doom and gloom. And here, I should be clear, I'm really referring to the majors that Fatima mentioned, the global companies listed in the global north, and not the artisanal scale activities. But when we look at the direction that investment is going, actually the Paris Agreement is starting to bite. The Paris Agreement has this clause 2.1c that says that all financial flows need to be aligned with the goals of the Paris Agreement. And that means that all money invested in due course is going to have to be invested in activities that lead to low carbon and climate resilient development. And I mean, that's not just for the MDBs or for banks, it's for pension funds, it's for major corporates, it's for all companies that are reporting on stock exchanges, and shareholders are becoming increasingly aware of this. So the impact of that, or the outcome of that, is that it is going to get increasingly harder to raise money for fossil fuel intensive investments. And investors are going to be seeking opportunities to invest in projects that advertise themselves as Paris aligned. And that means low carbon, climate resilience. So a mining company that wants to raise money to invest in producing critical minerals that aims to do so using fossil fuels is going to find it hard. Whereas a mining company that says, we want to do this through investing in renewable energy and zero carbon green mining technologies, they should find that it becomes increasingly easier to access those funds. And I think that's a really important point. You know, you see the momentum of these talks this week. Frankly, it's overwhelming. That the rate at which things are moving is really impressive. And I know we're not going to meet our 1.5 degree target, but things are moving. And I think that the mining sector and critical minerals is an area where we might well see real impacts on that. And donors, stakeholders, shareholders, and youth, through their ability to raise their voice and to protest and so on, we all have a role to play in ensuring that this transaction takes place. Let me pause there, but I hope you'll come back to ask me more about financing these activities.
I'll get back to that, but there is one aspect I want to ask you about before I get to the audience to get their perspective and feedback, which is you've mentioned a very important aspect, and I think the aspect of actually ensuring that financial flows must be disclosed as per Article 2C. But what I want to ask you is the same thing I asked Chave, which is that the fossil fuel industry is not sitting back because we are talking about critical minerals and just transition and decarbonization. They're fighting back. So how do we ensure competitiveness with critical minerals to be able to outrun, if I might put it that way, this powerful fossil fuel industry?
So I think the key to this really is the long-term strategies, which is the documents required under the Paris Agreement that lay out how economies are going to become carbon neutral by 2050, 2075, whenever. And developing countries have more flexibility. There is scope for them to peak later and then decline to get to net zero, whereas you see that countries in the global north are setting targets for 2045, 2050, and so on. So these long-term strategies are critically important. Sadly, we only have, I think, 3 or 4 published in Africa. There is some good news that the MDBs are working together, and I think we now find a solution to create a long-term strategy facility, which will provide resources to help countries prepare their long-term strategies. But these are critical documents because they need to lay out the pathway to get to net zero. And the mining sector is definitely a sector that needs to be addressed in the long-term strategy. And governments need to say, look, Mr. Mining Sector, you have to play your role in transitioning to net zero. And we're going to issue permits for the next 5-10 years that will allow you to do so using fossil fuels. But as we move forward, we expect to see you transitioning to net zero, to renewable energy. And that has to happen. And so it has to come from the top level. But the presidents are here, they're making these commitments, and the donors are listening.
And the donors are listening. Political will drives transformational development, and in this case, it is vital. We've heard from the panelists, exciting, different perspectives. We would like to get from you questions in the next 5 minutes, then get back, and then I will ask the panelists the last remaining questions, and then we'll run up. Yes, please, put your hand up. Yes, I can see. Yes, 3 hands. Is there someone to help? I think there is a microphone in the middle. Can someone help us unlock it if it is unlockable? Or unless it's like a critical mineral.
I need to put this.
Good
Yes,
morning,
please.
and thanks to the panelists. My name is Johnson Kem. I work as a Senior Climate Security Advisor for UNMISS and UNDP in South Sudan. My question goes to all the panelists. Most of these critical minerals are in conflict areas, which again, they fuel conflict and could also be opportunity for peace building. What do you see about that? Thank you very much.
Thank you for that precise question, Johnson. Very timely indeed. And I would like to get a perspective of the panelists. We'll take 4 questions, and then we come back and then get back again. Yes, please, go ahead, your name, and straight to the question.
Oh, okay. My name is Chris Benzana. I'm Principal Energy Advisor at the African Union Development Agency, based in Johannesburg. I have 3 questions, which I want to pose all at once so that I don't come back. One is on the youth, or the, you called it the child employment, which is happening in critical minerals. I see one challenge there. If we allow our children to work in the agricultural sector at home, and now comes another activity which is in the village, which is paying more money than agriculture, how can we really emphasize what you said? You have a law in Uganda which can prevent children to be used on the critical minerals.
Second.
The second one is on the transparency. The transparency initiative. If we have sales of uranium from Niger to France costing less than $20 per kg, and when Canada is getting uranium from East Europe, it pays almost $1,000 or $500 per kg. How do we compare that? That from Africa, Minerals are very cheap. The same thing with lithium. Lithium from Zimbabwe costs about $300 to $400
Great.
a
Three,
ton.
the third, please.
Okay, the third one is on the safeguard of the Paris Agreement. How do we account for our raw materials being taken to China by fossil fueled transport? And then when it comes back in battery form, we call it clean energy. What can you do in that form where you prevent extraction? How can you do it in such a manner that we have local production or local value addition? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris, for those three questions. I think we'll just take one question and then, yes,
I'm
please, your
already
name and
Yes, I'm
your
already
question.
here.
Yes, I think you'll have to walk behind. The microphone is in a critical position.
I want to ask a question.
Please just ask the question. Yes, you are audible enough. Yeah. Yeah, please, just go ahead. Just go ahead. Time is critical. Good. Your name again? Mudiema. Mudwehis. That's short form. Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. I think from the questions that have come, it's all about justice. And I think the panelists, you've heard, you've
I'm already on
listened.
the panel. Hello? I've been here.
Yes, please go ahead. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
thank you. I'm Engineer Dennis Sariho from the East African Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency. My question, first of all, is it adds on what they have talked about, political stability, and then want to see case studies on what's happening in the countries. Where there are many minerals, there is a lot of political instability. So there should be political will. If we don't do that, then we are likely to continue seeing a lot of wars happening and the governments fighting with rebels and so on. Then the next is on the case studies. What's happening in Africa so far? Which countries have started now the process of mining and processing minerals to produce energy products like solar batteries and so on? And what is the roadmap? Is there a roadmap? Maybe by this period, what should happen?
Yeah,
so
thank
to
you
walk
very
the talk.
much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, before you go, please, your name again and where you work.
Engineer Dennis Sariho from the East African Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency.
Excellent. Renewable energy and energy efficiency. Are you handling the critical minerals aspect? And what are you doing in 1 minute?
Yes. Basically, IACURI looks at regional policy harmonization. It looks at research, development, and innovation, looking at the regional perspective. We want to ensure that there is research, development, and innovation, support to local manufacturing, and investments in renewable energy and energy efficiency. And this requires, and it is work in progress.
Excellent.
That's why I was asking.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for taking the time to do that, colleagues. I'll get back to the panelists, and please, in no particular order, you should be able with the questions that you're comfortable. But let me just say this. Justice is not just about how everybody benefits, it's also about how everybody engages in the process. And I think the questions that have been asked have gotten to the core. And without much ado, I would like to go in a particular order in which I started. And I think, let me start with you, Shave, the way you are seated, and then go to Caroline, then go to Gareth, then go to Fatma, and Desiree. What's your take with any of these questions?
Thank you, and thanks to the audience for your active participation. It's very helpful to get your direct questions.
2 minutes, please.
Yeah. So let me first address the question around local manufacturing and how to bring in opportunities across the value chain rather than just focusing on the primary sector. I think if we look at examples globally, there's some really interesting examples of industry clusters Or, for example, in Sweden, what they've done quite well is mining clusters. So this is an opportunity to bring together different organizations that represent different stages of the value chain to come together, co-invest in research and development, co-invest in infrastructure, and this could be an interesting way to bring this into countries in the continent. Just the second one on just transition. I think what we talked about policy, but what we didn't talk about is demand. And what we do within the Climate Champions team is we look out for demand signals and we convene the non-state actor communities to put forward demand signals. So there are organizations like the First Movers Coalition or IRMA that I mentioned has a group of purchasing members as well. So the goal of the market is really to ensure that there's a demand signal for responsibly produced minerals that are really truly part of that just energy transition, that bring together and engage with community members.
Yes, Shave, Chris did, he brought up a very important point. Minerals are mined, exported, processed, imported. Carbon footprint. How do you do that? I mean, this is an issue. It's a big issue, right? Have you guys started handling this or tackling, or have you had a thought about it? 1 minute, then I go to Caroline. Sorry, I'm a little bit tough, but on this.
No worries. Of course, I mean, I think it's a big challenge for the continent. The fact that you have reserves, you ship them, you have to think about the shipping emissions coming back. As I mentioned at the start, we are engaging with mining companies on those breakthrough goals, which involve the scope 1 and 2 emissions.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I like the aspect you've mentioned about engaging non-state actors to create demand signals. Very, very important. Then, Caroline, yes. Johnson said something that I think cannot be ignored about critical minerals can be a uniting force for peace as well as a disintegrator, if I might put it that way. Your take?
I think that is actually very critical because
I like that.
We don't seem to have transparency of the originality of where the minerals actually come from. And I think that's why it is very important that the countries need to sign up to ETI and actually practice. Because with that, then there will be the aspects of
the full abbreviation. I want it to come from you, ETI. A lot of people may be in here.
Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative.
Right.
Yes, so it's very critical that, yes, countries sign up to this and practice the provisions in the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, because then the aspects of disclosure in terms of the originality of where the minerals come from will be there. Right. And we shall definitely avoid the aspects of the conflicts that are actually related to the aspects of the minerals, and where people seem to indicate that minerals don't originate from a particular country, but they seem to be reported there.
Right, I think there was a question from Chris that was directed to you about child labor, and I think it was child employment in areas where there's mining. How are you handling that to take them off from being lured into these mining sectors because of lack of alternatives? Is there a kind of a diversification to other alternatives that the country in the policy that you mentioned that is being developed, that is happening? I think that's what Chris was trying to insinuate. Is that correct? Yes, please. 1 minute.
Yes, in terms of employment of the children, yes, there are alternatives to mining in our local content policy, where we actually train the youth to alternatives to mining, but we also provide opportunities for provision of capital, where the youth can be able to engage in other alternatives, but also in terms of energy itself, we find that we promote the productive uses of energy, and in that, the youth are actually able to start other initiatives because the energy is available.
Yes, let me just ask this, not a question, just to get your note on it. Secularity is becoming not just a buzzword, but it is the way to go to reduce the footprint and at the same time create opportunities for youth. Is your ministry engaging with the Ministry of Environment in factoring in this aspect of circularity to ensure that at least recycling in mining to reduce demand for exploring fresh minerals. Is that something that you guys are doing? It's just a yes or no.
We have the government of Uganda. We have the mining and mineral policy, and the law now that critically takes into considerations the aspects of ensuring that we do green mining.
Perfect.
And you have a decarbonization policy and strategy, and you also have a climate change strategy and action plan that specifically looks at how we are going to reduce our carbon emissions from the mining sector.
Excellent. Gareth, transparency. I'm not the one who brought it up. The panelists brought it up, and I think Shave brought this up, and even Desiree or Fatima brought this up. But you heard Chris. I know that, yes, of course, there is a question that I have on the finance side, but we cannot ignore this one because it's about trade, it's about markets, it's about currency, it's about foreign reserves. So what's your take with what he asked about not having a level playing field in getting the costing and the price of these minerals? What is going to guarantee that Africa will have a fair price? What's your take? I mean, your perspective. I'm just putting you on the spot on this. If you have some perspective to share, then please, all the other panelists, you can be able to do so, just in 2 minutes.
Yes, thank you very much. So I agree. I think transparency really is one of the key words that comes out from this. And I want to link that to Johnson's question about the impact in critical areas and in conflict areas, because climate change is something that's driving conflict in many areas, not just in the mining sector. And the key to resolving that is transparency, and linked to the climate justice point that the lady from Cannes, South Africa, raised. Without transparency, we cannot understand who are the beneficiaries and who is getting and benefiting from these activities and who is losing out, because that's really the key thing. And the traditional definition of just transition has very much focused in the labor markets, and it was about finding jobs for people who've lost their jobs because of the cleaning up of industry. But that doesn't apply in Africa because most people don't have jobs in the first place. So we have to extend that definition to look and see what sectors of society are losing out from these activities, who otherwise are unrecognized and silent and don't get picked up in that. So it's farmers, it's women, it's youth who maybe had undocumented rights or no rights at all to use these resources, but were doing so, and they lose out, and that leads to conflict. So transparency, I think, is really key. And I want to come to Crispin's third point on the this issue about the transition of raw materials being shipped around. I can't answer it exactly, but I want to highlight the role of the EU Emissions Trading Scheme Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM. This is a really interesting development. Some see it as a threat to African industry. I see it as an opportunity. Very briefly, it means that when you export goods into Europe, you will now have to purchase carbon allowances so that you can then sell them into the European markets. And those carbon allowances are costing in the region of 80 euros a ton. That means if you can produce goods using zero carbon technologies, you don't have to buy any allowances, and you have a huge competitive advantage in the European market. And that can be a very strong source of finance to pay for sustainable green mineral investments on the continent. And I think, I mean, we mentioned China. China doesn't yet have anything equivalent to CBAM, but that is the direction that things are going. And we will see that, those that can invest in green zero carbon production will benefit from that in the future.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Gareth, for that. Just a point, it's not a question. So do you think that barcoding to enhance traceability of where these minerals are coming from, that they're environmentally, they're produced in a way that is not working against the environment, they're produced not using child labor, etc. Is that something that the bank is working on to come out with that?
Oh, for sure, for sure. We cannot invest donors' money in activities that don't meet the safeguards, and that now also includes Paris alignment. And I mentioned this thing about the sourcing of solar panels from China and enforced labor. So we are very aware of these issues, and our donors are completely on top of it.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Yes, Fatima, your docket. It's about transparency. Over to you, please.
Thank you very much for the question. So I'll first touch on this issue of costing and transparency. So one area we at the EITI work on is commodity trading transparency, which is what this touches on. Understanding what sales agreements are in place, what are the values in these sales agreements. And to be very honest with you, there is limited donor support and or interest in this area. Because, for example, we only work with the Swiss government on this, and I'd even like to encourage the AFDB, because these gaps are from the government. There's no understanding on how commodity trading is undertaken, and then that also trickles down to CSOs and to the communities. So the disenfranchisement is across the whole value chain. We need to start looking into that area more, because these companies have qualified traders. This is what they do all day, and therefore they know how to work the market. But when we look at these agreements, you see there's just one standardized price. Yet if you look at the sales, for example, at the London Metals Exchange, you see it fluctuates every day. So we need to be smart, employ business hats, to be very honest. That is the only way we as Africans are going to benefit from these critical minerals. On the question of justice and energy transition, you asked what are the various organizations doing. So we at the EITI, for example, have been working with communities, both affected by mining and those who will be affected in the decrease in fossil fuels, because we feel they're also being left out. When these companies leave, the service providers, making them understand, one, what is the energy transition? What are the potential impacts for them, both positive and negative? And also, where can they find information about this? Because
let me jump in there, an important point, and I think it responds to a question on justice here. So, over 80% of the entire continent is in the informal sector, so to speak, and they create over 80% of the jobs. This language we're using here today, the mother in the village might not be able to understand. So my question to you is, what do you think can be done to make sure that this discussion that we're having here is relevant to the common Wananchi, as they say it in Kenya, or to the Mamamboga in the village, to be able to see direct benefits from this? Just your perspective, if you have an idea on that.
Thank you. That's an excellent question. So I'd encourage you to go to our website. If you were to Google search EITI Ford Foundation Project. So in Ghana, we've been working with communities that will be affected by the gas pipeline. And what has happened there is the information has been translated into Twi. So as you're saying, so that the common Wananchi can understand what exactly is being put out. And they've also been infomercials on radio, posters have been made. So taking very practical steps to ensure dissemination goes right to the ground.
Thank you. Yes, Desiree or Desire, I don't know, in French is Desiree, so, but I hope you take it. You've heard, you've listened. This is a young continent. What's your take with all these questions that have come and the answers you've heard? Again, I'll go back to the question I asked you before. The question on peace, critical minerals, leverage as a tool for peace, as a tool to bring everyone together. How can this happen with a youthful population so energetic, passionate, but at the same time impatient?
Thank you. So I'll answer your question relating to the question that was asked by the gentleman at the back on the case studies on the critical minerals. So I would say a lot of lithium has been discovered in Zimbabwe, and it has been making strides to mainstream young people within the mining sector, so as to promote sustainable mining through environmental safeguards and at the same time enabling economic growth. And I think the biggest case study as well is like this Africa Climate Summit, where different countries have gathered together so as to promote African continental devolution. Because at the end of the day, the critical minerals that we're finding in our own continent must be used to develop our own continent. And then to your question is critical minerals as a way of promoting peace amongst young people. I think it all comes with economic growth, because if economies are stable, then at the end of the day, it reduces unrest between amongst young people. And I also like to comment on issue to do with child labor. It is one of the most prominent problem in Zimbabwe, with the illegal mining sector constituting over 80% of the jobs. And Zimbabwe has been trying by all means to implement policies, for example, the Child Labor Act and the Constitution of Zimbabwe, Chapter 4, Part 3, Section 81, from 1 to 4. But at the end of the day, I think we can all agree that in the countries in Africa, it is still a big challenge in terms of implementing the policies that we're putting on paper. That is why we'll be relying on the long-term strategies that are being talked about, if we can promote economic development and make sure that we safeguard children.
Now we have to start doing the run-up because we have 5 minutes, but I'll start with you. It said that youth should be given a space, a place on the table. But sometimes you don't get given things, you have to take them. How are you going to take your place and space in this discussion of critical minerals and run with it? And what do you think should be done by each of the organizations that have spoken on the table today? Your question directly to them and what you want them to do, and to policymakers. In 2 minutes.
Thank you so much. You're actually correct that at the end of the day, we as young people, we are not like charity beggars where we want to be given like a seat without doing anything. So I believe as young people, we should have the will to propel development first so that we are credible to be given the seats at these high level tables. Because you find out that if in our respective countries we keep running to illegal mining sectors, then we are not credible enough to be given the space on these high level tables. We have to prove that we have that ability, to bring change to these discussions. At the end of the day, it's not only about the seat, it's about investment, it's about the untapped potential that is within the youth. So we have to start to tap the potential first within ourselves, and then we get these high level opportunities. And then from all these local partners who are here, I believe their commitments and priorities which you have set forth for your respectable institutions to propel. I think we should just walk the talk. Thank you.
We should just walk the talk, an amazing way to run up on that. And then Fatima, how do we walk the talk when illicit financial flows are leaving the continent 89 billion US dollars every year?
Thanks for that question. I would say we need to use the data that is provided to us for purpose, because it's very easy for us to sit here and just say information, but a lot of it is already out there. But what are we using it for? And this is both for government, for CSOs. Interrogate the data, ask questions, write op-eds, go on panels and talk about it, because it's only through advocacy that there will be change. And for the youth, I can say at least in EITI implementing countries, 27 of which are in Africa, we have multi-stakeholder groups that consist of government, companies, and CSOs, and participation is open. For me, those are channels where you can practically participate in the governance of the extractive industries of your countries. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Use data, use your spaces to voice solutions, not only complaints. That's what Fatima is saying. And make sure that you speak solutions, you contribute to the process. Yes, Garrett, the African Development Bank, that have been supporting development in the continent, is now caught in between what I call a deep blue sea and a hard rock. Fossil fuels fighting back, and the route to critical minerals being charted forward by African head of state. How feasible do you think this can happen, and the role that the bank is playing? Are we doing enough?
Thank you very much. So let me just start by saying I'm not a minerals expert, but I'm very encouraged from what I've heard on the table today. I think this panel discussion has been really interesting. On oil and gas, so to be very clear, the African Development Bank does not invest in any coal-fired power plants. We do very little gas now, but under the terms of the Paris Agreement, developing countries are entitled to increase their emissions before they decrease. So we may yet see some further gas-fired power generation projects coming. We can do what we can to ensure that they are ready to transition to green hydrogen and so on. It's a very tricky line to walk, and there will be heated debates in our board between our regional member and non-regional member countries if we take any sort of gas or fossil fuel projects to the board. We see increasing interest in industrial decarbonisation. The Climate Investment Funds, which is one of the major international climate funds, is about to open a window on industrial decarbonisation. Green shipping is one of the areas that we think we might look at under that to enable Africa to benefit from its proximity to Europe and North America and to reduce its emissions from those shipping lines. And we know that some of the major shipping lines, Maersk, for example, is already investing in dual fuel shipping containers, and we're looking at port infrastructure. I think that there's always more to do. We've heard a lot about reforming the financial infrastructure, accessing funds from the special drawing rights and so on. If those monies become available, then the African Development Bank and other MDBs and DFIs will be investing that money into Paris-aligned projects, because we are all committed to Paris alignment now, and that means that we will be looking only for low carbon and climate resilient opportunities.
Do you think that the global stock take should include priorities tied to critical minerals? Just a yes or no?
Yes.
Excellent. Yes, Caroline, to you. You've heard, and the youth are on their toes, saying we want to be part, and not just being part, but want to do things. From the government, what has been done to take the interest of the youth into consideration? And your last words in 2 minutes.
I think here really we are focusing on the aspects of the stakeholder engagements and making sure that the youth are involved and making sure there is skilling of the youth to be able to participate in the mining sector, but also retooling. So, and also provision of finance. We have a bank, a Ugandan bank that is really providing resources towards green financing, but also we are really focusing on the aspects of our energy transition, where we are looking at opportunities where the different segments of the society should be able to participate, but with the focus on the youthful population. Uganda really has a very young population, so our focus is on ensuring that we retool them, we reskill them, but also be able to ensure that they have the financial resources that they should be able to invest in the mining sector and other alternatives.
Thank you very much, Caroline, for that contribution. Shave, it is said that the hype, and I use the word hype intentionally, of critical minerals is going to be short-lived. Just like we heard Africa rising, and then when Africa was limping, we didn't hear about it anymore. Now we're hearing the critical minerals, and there are innovations that are happening. Today, cobalt may be very, very critical, and nickel and lithium for batteries, but there is research and innovation that is happening that lithium tomorrow might become displaced. Do you think the continent is ready? And through your work, are you guys taking into consideration these rapid changes, innovations that are disruptive and presenting risk? As you run off your 2 minutes, please touch that if you can.
Thank you. You may call it a hype, but what we're seeing is a bit of a delay in attention to the importance of critical minerals. And we do see this as being something that is going to persist. But as you say, there are innovations that are coming through because there's consciousness that there is dependency on some of these minerals, and there's supply chain disruption that we're seeing with global macroeconomic trends in the past year and beyond. But what we're doing within the Climate Champions team is to really provide a platform for non-state actors to demonstrate best practice in the sector. Whether that's best practice on nature-based solutions, whether that's best practice on circular economy and recycling to manage the accessibility of these minerals. And we're really looking to ensure that we bring adaptation and mitigation solutions together as we work towards the goals of the Paris Agreement.
Do you think, I didn't touch this, but this will go to you. I didn't hear the mention of the word Africa Continental Free Trade Area. And given the fact that these minerals are unevenly distributed, and other countries within the continent need to benefit, I didn't hear that. So what would you say should be done? How are you mobilizing non-stakeholders or non-state actors to then be able to put pressure to ensure that at least Africa Continental Free Trade be leveraged to engage in this discussion? Not yet.
Difficult question. I'd say that our role is to really bring forward the good work that's happening in the sector. So if it's organizations that are working on this, we would provide a platform for them to address this and provide an opportunity for collaboration.
Yes. And Gary, you are not off the wood yet. In less than a minute, Africa Continental Free Trade. Do you think it was a mistake that didn't come up?
I'm going to skip that one. I'm not an expert on the free trade Africa.
Sometimes it's non-experts that give the best answers. Thank you very much, colleague. Give a round of applause for this amazing discussion today. The topic, critical mineral for a just transition, you heard very clear what can be done, what needs to be done. And what was coming out very clear is that everybody needs to be part and parcel of this discussion, because the fact that Africa have 30% of these critical minerals doesn't necessarily mean that Africa, if it wets and folds her arms, she's going to benefit from it. But transparency, ensuring that traceability become the highlight was actually an element that came out very, very clearly. And also the aspect of ensuring how people can actually be traced in terms of how to engage young people and make sure that at least they are not being lured into mining and misused, but alternatives provided to them. And trainings, vocational trainings, as we heard from the youth, very, very important, ensuring that institutions in the continent actually specialize in manpower development beyond mining, and especially technical skills in value addition. We heard about new policies that have been developed. Uganda came out with that very clearly, the engagement of non-state actors. And most importantly, we heard about the intentionality to be able to ensure that at least we use minerals for good, and to do that, we all need to see the benefits beyond the immediate gains that are being seen at the moment. That was it, and we've come to the close of our session. Thank you very much. Maybe we'll take a group photo. Excellent work.
Ibaridi ni mbaya, ibaridi imetetemeka ya kutosha, kuja unikumbatie. Nimejaribu kahawa, nikajaribu